So the Conjuring franchise takes a turn towards the occult, as we take a fictionalized journey through an amalgamation of stories, from the true case files of the Warrens, and the Conjuring. The devil made me do it. In July of 1981, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren assist in the exorcism of young David Glatzel, which escalates until his sister's boyfriend, Arnie Johnson, invites the possessing spirit into himself, which Ed witnesses as he suffers a major heart attack. Soon Arnie becomes the target of an occult power that twists his perceptions into committing murder. As Ed recovers, he attempts to aid Lorraine in investigating this horrific crime, which doesn't add up for them, but he attempts to push himself further than he should, in light of his impaired health. The Warrens weave through the discovery of a satanic totem under the Glatzel home, the macabre occult research of former priest Father Castor, and a stunted police investigation of a murder-suicide in a nearby town of 2 college girls. The pieces gradually connect to a larger pattern and curse that not only puts Arnie at dire risk, but the Warrens themselves become targeted by this evil, which could steal their lives and their souls. So the third film in the main Conjuring franchise saw its UK theatrical release on May 26, 2021, and hit US cinemas about a week and a half later on June 4th, along with a simultaneous release on HBO Max, but still managed to garner a pretty healthy profit at the box office, garnering $202 million of a $39 million budget, still making very substantial profit for New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers. It's very interesting to note that even though James Wan was not the director on this film, still stayed on as producer and contributed story credit with it, along with screenwriter David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick, who had been kind of a regular collaborator for James Wan since like the second Conjuring film and worked on Aquaman and a couple of projects here and there. So it's like become the go-to guy for James Wan to work on screenplays and collaborate and stuff like that. So that's really kind of cool. And he kind of decided, okay, well, I'm going to have to pass this on to someone else. And that ended up being director Michael Chaves, who had previously done the sort of Conjuring tie-in film, The Curse of La Llorona, which apparently didn't get the best of reactions and critical reviews and stuff like that. It was kind of a lower regarded film in the entire expanded spin-off universe. But Juan apparently saw something very much a large bit of potential in it. He saw a lot of things in course of making that film and seeing how things turned out and certain things here and there. They felt very confident to pass this on to one of the mainline films in the franchise that had done so much good work for Juan to open up a lot more doors for him. It was just a very interesting type of thing to see, like, he has that kind of confidence guy to put that on him. And it's like, there's a very good sensibility of what Michael Chaves brings to this whole thing that feels like a very organic transition in style and approach, and somewhat in the tone, which does have a bit of a shift to it in a certain way, because previously you're dealing with like haunted house type of stuff here and there. Now they're kind of moving more into like a almost noir investigative occult type of thing that honestly feels a lot like when I'm watching this whole thing, it's like it feels a lot like an X-Files episode. Like one of those Monster of the Week type of things where it's very horror-centric and stuff like that. It just has that feel, that style, that tone, that approach in a certain way. And it's not a bad thing. I think that's a really kind of interesting thing to kind of grasp and kind of work on, because you don't really see a lot of things like that as much. It doesn't quite go for that type of approach in a lot of horror films these days, sort of supernatural mysteries, stuff like that. It has a bit of an intriguing sort of an approach to it, just a way that I feel is a nice way to kind of freshen up the franchise at this point, because even if you're not even watching the spin-offs, which I've never done, I've only watched the main Conjuring films. The first one was, I think the first one was fantastic. I think it's fantastic. Second film I felt was like trying a little too hard. Overpacked a lot of things. I felt like the pacing was a little off. The story balance wasn't the best it could. I thought it was a little over-bloated to a certain degree, and it was trying a little too hard and went a little over the top in some places. You go into this one, it's like, you want to do something a little bit different. You got a lot of different places you could probably take this entire franchise and take it in a little bit of a different angle, a little bit of a different direction. Explore some other tones or some other supernatural type of things to mix it up a little bit, change it up a tad bit so it doesn't get too tired. You're not kind of ringing the same bell over and over again. You're kind of introducing some other ways you can go. And it's kind of a nice thing to do kind of a little bit earlier on in a franchise, so instead of when you get like number 7 or 8 or whatnot, and you're seeing like the Warrens of like 1999 or something like that, and it's like you've been watching all these things for like 20 years, now you freshen it up. They freshen it up at a certain point in time where I feel like it is kind of beneficial to a certain degree, but not everyone kind of seemed to really take on with this one. But there's a lot of good reviews I saw. It's like I've seen different reactions back and forth in terms of what people felt about the entire film, how they felt like the transition from Juan to Chaves was going on, and various other things, and how the story and tone and whatnot kind of shifts here and there. But I actually kind of liked how they kind of moved the story in different places and stuff like that to make it a bit of a different type of thing, to engage with it in a different type of fashion here. And of course, dealing with the entire story here, what the entire film has the setup with the entire thing with Arnie Johnson and the exorcism beginning the thing and all that stuff rolling into the trial and stuff like that. Kind of very telling that the film doesn't quite get as deep into that. It gets more involved with the investigative stuff and the occultist stuff, all that type of stuff, because they decided, like, okay, we're going to take little pieces of different stories that the Warrens were involved with. All these little case files, like a couple different things, and kind of mix it and blend it together to make a much more interesting story in a certain way. Because they don't want to deal so much with, like, boring courtroom drama stuff. So they go off and deal with this entire thing where occultism and all these different demonic things are going on outside of the courtroom, and kind of make a more interesting story that's more focused on the Warrens themselves. So I think that's kind of an interesting angle to go for. You kind of take things and kind of blend them together to a certain degree to make it a more expansive, interesting, and freeing story, so you can kind of create a whole different type of thing that's like, we got the basis of this thing, which is something that did happen, but we're not going to kind of deal with it quite as much as kind of just the basis to go off and do something completely different. They can just kind of thread into the other thing and just kind of deal with the ramifications of it, bookend at the beginning and end of the film. So most of the film is just dealing with the occultist stuff. That's more just kind of like the conglomeration of all these different case files they've worked on, police investigations and various other little things here and there. So I think that's an interesting sort of approach to go with, trying to create another sequel. You kind of pick and choose the little things here and there, what they did over the years, and create a fresh story for it. And I think getting that entire transition from James Wan over to Michael Chaves is a very fluid type of one to a certain degree. I think Juan does handle the sort of quiet tension a lot better. He's a lot better, just like very subtle horror to a certain degree, but there's a lot of like the visual style of the entire thing, which is held out so much by cinematographer Michael Burgess, who's actually the son of cinematographer Don Burgess, who shot the second film. So that's an interesting, again, keeping a lot of things in line, but I think this film looks way better than the second Conjuring film. I think it just looks absolutely fantastic because they got a lot of interesting, different locations to work with. A lot of different set pieces, a lot of different production design, a lot of different locations, kind of spread the story out and deal with different environments and kind of shoot things in a much more different type of way. And kind of, like I said, a little bit of a noir style to it. There's like heavy shadows and dealing with things that just feel a little bit more in that type of neo-noir, film noir type of way, in a certain style in a way that I think just comes off very, very well. I think the entire film looks absolutely phenomenal. The cinematography is fantastic. Everything comes off so good because you still have a lot of that fluid camera movement. The steady cams moving through different rooms and stuff like that, which was so much James Wan in those first two films, showing that sort of fluidity of how to move through scenes and stuff like that and create an immersive world. I think they still maintain that a lot in this whole thing. I feel like so much of it just like it feels so much in line with the first two films on a visual sense and how the thing moves and photographs everything, angles, all the different things, and just keeps a certain atmosphere and mood going in the entire film with how it's lit and photographed overall. I think all that comes off very well, and that comes off between the cinematographer and the director working in collaboration to maintain a certain style and keep that certain mood going. I think that comes off very, very well in how he just handles all this stuff. Again, the drama comes off so very well. Just like you can feel like he has that sensibility. He has so much of a very strong grasp on that type of stuff, along with dealing with all the sense of terror in the entire film. There's so many really good, just like creepy little moments in the entire film that come out so beautifully. I think he really does good stuff, but there is a kind of a reliance a little bit on the jump scare type of things, like loud noises, jumping out, stuff like that, which is a little on the cheap side. It's not the thing I prefer. I prefer something that has a little bit more suspense, ratchet up the tension a little bit more, get into the mood of stuff and getting crawled up on you in a certain way. I like that sort of way to kind of get in under the skin of the audience. Doesn't get employed quite as much here, but I think there's still a good, solid hand here at the helm of the entire film that does come off very well. Just like you can see that it's like you're not falling off greatly in quality. There's not a major shift in the quality of the direction or the handling of the film in a certain way. I'm sure James Wan, as a producer, did have some influence on the entire thing and did give him advice when he asked for it, but a lot of stuff with Michael Chaves, he brought a very good sensibility here because there was a lot of reliance on practical stuff. Like the entire thing at the beginning of the film with the exorcism and the kid starts contorting everywhere, that's not a special effect. They got an actual 12-year-old contortionist named Emerald Wolf to actually double hit the kid and do all this stuff practically. Not a single thing aside from like when they're splashing the holy water and doing face replacement, but all the contortion stuff is practical stuff. And it's incredible to see this kid doing all this stuff behind the scenes. Like, it's insane. It's insane how much she could actually do this stuff. It's incredible. It benefited the film so much in that opening sequence, which is just like harrowing and ratcheting tension stuff. Like, it's just like, it's like the culmination of another film there. And giving you that right at the beginning of the film to give you the biggest punch possible to kind of inject you into the entire film and set the stage for all the drama that's going forward from the story. It's a very good setup to really kind of supercharge you into the horror of the film, set up the characters, set up the situation, set up all the little story threads you're going to get going on here. So it's like, it's a really goddamn good opening. Wonderfully benefited from the lack of CGI, working so much with practical sensibilities there. And even someplace like we have later on in the film where Lorraine's in the middle of the forest and having that sort of vision and had this big sort of crane shot and the light kind of moves all over the place. That's also not an effect shot. They did that entire thing with a giant, super bright lighting rig to shift it around the entire forest there. Probably a set, absolutely, almost certainly that's got to be a set. But they did the entire thing and it was just like, so many things that they went, just the extra steps, like, if we can do it practically, let's do it practically, because it's going to benefit the quality of the film at the end of the day. If you can find those ways, like, it's going to be far more interesting to see it done live action in a certain way than kind of fiddling around in the computer with it. It's a lot more realistic, a lot more texture of the entire film to see that sort of visceral quality in so many different things and how they approach the practical effects and the lighting and all these different cinematography tricks, stuff like that. They just go for that type of thing, and it's a great thing to see from filmmakers today to kind of like see that thing turning in a certain way, going back from everything's got to be CGI to like appreciating the practicalness of filmmaking again, to see how you can do it with a little bit more effort on the set and making sure that it looks so much better than you could possibly do in the computer. I like that quality, just like those little touches add something to the sensibility of a filmmaker, in my opinion. And I just think he still does work wonderfully with the cast here. Just like there's some fantastic actors in this entire film. Of course, our franchise mainstays of Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, they're fantastic. Just like, they're just so absolutely just beyond words to a certain degree. How good they are in these roles and the bond that they have, the relationship they show on screen. They just feel so deeply heartfelt and so beloved from fans and stuff like that. It's like they're so good, and just as actors, but so much in these roles that brings so much depth, so much life, so much emotion to the forefront of the story here that, again, is very different from a horror franchise. Usually you're following like the villain, the bad guy, the bad entity, the killer or something like that. It's a bit of a different shift for a horror franchise where you're following the protagonists from one film to the next. It's a different entity, a different darkness you have to fight every single film, and you're following these characters that have a lot of heart and soul and stuff like that, a lot of emotional bonds that build up and develop throughout the entire franchise. And I like the fact that they follow along this entire storyline with Ed Warren here, portrayed by Patrick Wilson, that at the beginning of the film with the exorcism, he ends up having a heart attack. And so that kind of flows through the entire film where he's now vulnerable. He can't be as physically proactive despite the fact that he's being kind of kind of reckless. He's kind of like he still wants to be the same Ed, but he can't really be that because of his heart condition now. And so he tries to kind of push himself into the forefront, but Lorraine's going to have to kind of push him back a little bit, be a little bit more aggressive on the entire thing, a little more assertive, that she doesn't want him charging into these things like you're doing damage to yourself, you're hurting yourself, but he kind of has this push and pull and this kind of struggle he has to deal with where he can't be that man anymore. He has to be a little bit more cautious of what he's doing, but he's not really following that advice, highlighted by the entire thing where he keeps leaving the damn pills at home, which creates a whole wonderful story throughout the entire film that pays off beautifully at the end of the film. Just like there's so much good stuff in terms of how he's portraying the role and having to struggle with that and not be that sort of just rock solid guy he's always been in these films. He's got to be forced to take a step back, and he's not entirely comfortable with it because he loves Lorraine. He doesn't, even like the whole thing was like they're going in the house and stuff like that where they got the crawl space. It's like, oh, don't do that, Lorraine. You're going to ruin your dress or like not. And she's got this wonderful look over there. It's like, it's kind of charming. It's very charming, but it's like, you can see it's like he really cares for her so much. He doesn't want to put her in danger. He very much wants to hold her back from being anything, any of that type of thing. He's used to being the guy to kind of take the assertive step forward. Now she has to take that, and Vera Farmiga, without a goddamn blemish anywhere, she just steps up so well in this whole film. Such a magnificent quality. The strength, the assertiveness, the way she has to be courageous in this situation, facing something that she has to take on much more on herself to deal with it and face it and try to overcome it and try to just confront it overall. It's a much more interesting type of way to see that dynamic kind of shift here and see that Vera Farmiga steps forward, does a fantastic job of it. Just shows so much of the strength, the compassion, but all these different things that you have with the character of Lorraine here. She just has that sensibility where she doesn't back down from this darkness, this evil, this occultist, all this type of stuff. She still feels like she has a belief system. She has a faith that she can stand up against and have a certain thing behind her that can defeat whatever this darkness is, this evil that's out there that they're trying to break the curse of. She believes that she has that ability to do that. I like so much that quality in both these characters. They have a belief in each other, belief in something else that is greater than whatever it is they're going after, going up against. I love that quality. It's so lovingly in everything they put together in this whole thing. I like so much that as the films are going along, they've always had this nice balance between the Warrens and where the families that they're trying to help. I always loved that quality in this whole thing. This one is much more heavily focused on them. It's much more feeling a little bit more anthology and sort of a little bit more TV episode type of thing. Like, okay, we know they're really the main characters, and we can really emphasize them a lot. We've got a lot of road and mileage behind us to really kind of develop them further, make a much more centric story around them and dealing with something else that impacts them more personally. Again, the two actors are incredible. Just like you couldn't find two better actors to bond together, bring these characters to life, and do such wonderful stuff. It's like, I love this story. I love the loving qualities of the story between them as we see the backstory of how they met and the romance and stuff like that, and just the quality of all that type of thing. It threads through everything so well. I feel so much for these characters when they're in peril, when things happen to them that are very dangerous and life-threatening. Just like, it just brings something out because they're such good actors. And you want to just talk phenomenal actors. John Noble here as Father Castor, this guy you'd know from the TV series of Fringe and Sleepy Hollow, of course. Denethor, Steward of Gondor from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This guy's out of this world. The quality of what he brings to the depth of the nuance and the emotion and all these tragic qualities of certain characters. Just seeing so much of what he brings out of this character who is this former priest that ended up going off investigating the Order of the Ram, the Disciples of the Ram, stuff like that, which is something that apparently got touched on in one of these spin-off films beforehand, but it's one of these fascinating characters. You just see what he brings and just this ominous, foreboding quality he brings with this sort of passionate sense of fear he has. Just like there's so much, he's so kind of fascinated by all this dark stuff, all this stuff that he's kind of been kind of a dark mirror in a certain way of like the Warrens, like he's gone off and investigated all this type of stuff, but he's kind of shrouded in all this darkness where the Warrens are a little bit more on the light side of stuff. They're on the hopeful side. He's a little bit more entrenched in the darkness here. It's very interesting, very fascinating how you see his role unfold the entire film. Apparently, in reshoots, they expanded his role in the film. They added more for him, and that's such a great thing because, again, the quality of what he brings in this whole thing, just like you can see the pain, the regret, the pathos of the character. There's so much the undercurrent of his performance here just has that shakiness, that sort of trembling quality, where it's like he knows the terror that's circling around him. He just has all these little secrets kind of bottled up inside of him, just like all the wrong decisions he made, all the obsessions that filtered down in the wrong ways, and got everything up to this point where it's like he's unleashed this evil. He's responsible for this stuff, and he's terrified of it. And you see it completely in his performance. He's scared shitless about this stuff. It's just like, I felt so much from his performance. It felt so tragic, like I said, and it makes you feel for his character. With only the couple of scenes he has in the film, he just projects and just saturates what his character does out to the audience and makes you feel something about what he's doing on screen to such a great degree. Can't say enough about John Noble. He's just out of this world, incredible actor. And getting a little something from kind of a newcomer here with Ruairi O'Connor, which I believe is the correct pronunciation. He portrays the character of Arnie Johnson here, where you get all this stuff with the real-life trial and all these different things, but disconnecting a little bit from that and just kind of looking at him and the performance and stuff like that. He doesn't get as much time to really develop himself as a character, but he does have a very likable, charming quality about him. There's such a vulnerability about the character that you can buy into in his situation. You can feel something about his character because he's very emotive in the entire film. Every single time he has a chance to really show something in that regard, pull something out from inside, he really gets that projected out on screen. Does a really good job of it. Even though I don't feel like, again, you get quite as much. You do get that story a little shuffled off to the side, and you don't get as much time. Like I said in the first two Conjuring films, you spend a very equal amount of time with the Warrens and the family that's in peril. You get a lot of time to kind of develop that and feel like they're fully fleshed out dimensional people. This one, again, gets the balance a little shifted off there, and you don't get that quite as much of a three-dimensionality about those characters who are dealing with that murder trial situation. They're a little kind of off to the side, but they're still very good performances between Arnie, the character people portraying Arnie, and his girlfriend. They're very good actors. They put on very solid pieces. They just don't get quite as much depth to work with in terms of developing something that's a little bit more dimensionality to it. But I think they do a very good job. But something that just really stand out here is Eugenie Bondurant, which I believe, again, is the correct pronunciation. I hope so. She playing the occultist in the entire film. She is creepy as shit. Man. It's just, again, another interesting shift for the entire franchise. Getting into like a real human villain. It's not some demonic entity that you're trying to do an exorcism on or stuff like that. Even though that flows into the story, that's not like the main villain. The main villain is a flesh and blood person who is just utterly evil. And satanic and cultist type of stuff and all these very, very dark type of things are just like swallowing up someone's soul in a certain way. This person has no empathy. They don't have any compassion. Nothing. They're just swallowed up with all this dark fascination, all this horrible satanic type of stuff. And it's just creepy what her performance is. Very still. Doesn't have to do big stuff. She just comes on the screen and just has a fantastic look. And all these different things, she just plays the thing with such a macabre sensibility. All these things going on around her. She's just really just fucking chilling in the film. I think performance is just fantastic. Everything she brings forward just throws you a little bit off in some place here and there. Just creepy, like I said. All these different things where she can get in all these sort of surreal situations and stuff like that, where you got all the visions and kind of warping things here and there in terms of your perceptions of what's going on. I like all these little things that the film's able to employ to make the character more of a dark threat, more evil, more twisted in a certain way. It's something much more tangible, evil you can deal with. Something you can feel and kind of touch out and grasp and not so much understand, but you can at least, you can perceive it. And it's an evil that just shows the entire dark reflection of things, the other shade that you can see on the other end of the spectrum here of how the Warrens deal with things and how collecting all those artifacts and all these different things could take a much more evil turn if you had it in the wrong hands or made the wrong decisions or exposed the wrong people. It's a wonderful, fascinating element of the entire story here. And I like how they create these characters, cast them exceptionally well, and just have all these people inhabit these roles and add these different things in the story here. I think it comes together very well. I think the cast is just fantastic in this entire film, and just like I can't find a flaw. I can't find a flaw in the quality of the casting and the acting performances. All hit off very, very well in this whole film. And also returning for this entire film is composer Joseph Bashar, who had done the previous two Conjuring films. So does a really good job here. No, doesn't go and do a lot of melodies or anything like that in terms of adding in an actual sort of theme or whatnot for the entire film. So does a good job getting these dark vibes and this sort of moody, ominous qualities to the entire film. Just it really just saturates and enhances so many different qualities of the film. I thought it was a little bit better than he had in the last film. I just grasped onto it more. It's I actually went and actually sat down and listened to the entire thing, which I had not done with the previous two films quite so much. I kind of like it. And though it's nothing terribly special, it's kind of almost wallpaper horror score. It still has a certain quality. It's if you want to sit down and kind of get into the moody ambiance and whatnot, if you're writing a screenplay like I do sometimes, it's kind of a nice type of thing to have in the background to get into the mood of certain things. So it's not a John Carpenter or a Christopher Young score or anything like that, but it's still a good piece of work. It aids the film very nicely in so many different cases. Just I like adding in a lot of the chorus type of stuff, the choral stuff. Really just added a little extra something on top of the entire score that really came through very nicely. But getting into the film, like I said, it's not as scary as the first two Conjuring films, but it still has its moments. Still has inspired points. The entire climax, I think, is really fantastically done. Everything going through the underground tunnels and the occultist, Ilsa, she's kind of putting all these different things or changing the perceptions of things, running down the corridor or whatnot, and Lorraine's seeing like a mirrored version of herself kind of reflected here and then back over here and then around here into the door and stuff like that, and turns around right into her face. It's just an interesting type of stuff. It's inventive stuff that I think aids towards the powers or whatnot, the cultists, stuff like that. It creates a peril, a disorienting sensibility that she can twist things around and pit them against one another when she kind of screws around with Ed's vision and everything like that, and he's just going crazy with the sledgehammer. It's it creates a certain sense of peril. It's a really well done sequence altogether, and it looks fabulous as well. The lighting and the cinematography, all that type of stuff, and the whatever trickery they're using with body doubles, stuff like that. It's fantastic. It's wonderfully put together. I like all the stuff, and just how the story kind of weaves together in that regard towards the end, where it's okay, Arnie's getting fully possessed now, and they have to do the exorcism stuff, and they have to break the altar and stuff like that. At least all ties together. Even though I'm not crazy so much about everything that is going on with the Arnie story, again, that's all the stuff that's kind of much more directly based on real events that some people have controversy over and stuff like that. Again, it's pushed aside to a certain degree, like I've said already. We're focusing mainly on the cultist stuff and all the investigative stuff, which I really kind of like in the film. Like I said, it just makes it feel like it's an episode of The X-Files or Angel or Supernatural or something like that. It's a little bit of a different vibe, and I kind of liked it. It's kind of hits me in a certain way that's okay, I dig it. I mean, there's a lot of highlights in the film for me. Again, the exorcism at the beginning of the film, even though they do the entire shot where the priest gets out of the cab and they're kind of, it's clearly The Exorcist, the actual fucking Friedkin film. They're trying to here's the imagery right up front in the film. It's okay, you don't have to jump on that so quickly, but I get where you're coming from. But every exorcism film has been chasing that for 50 years now. So regardless of that, it's fine. But it's that's a fantastic sequence. I like all the stuff where they are going through the woods and Lorraine's getting the visions of Jessica and her friend and the suicide murder pact thing that happens because of the part of the curse, and the entire thing where she falls off the edge and Ed has to go and then do that. It's like the entire character work in that scene is fantastic. How he's kind of sacrificing his own well-being to make sure that she's protected and safe and save her and stuff like that. I love that quality. All these different things, like even when they're kind of like breaking into the morgue or the funeral home or whatnot and checking to see if she can get the vision off the dead body and all those different things, and then the corpse of the giant fat guy or whatnot starts storming after him, and even later on, it's like it's good set pieces. Like, it's interesting, it's kind of fresh, it's kind of a different type of thing. Like I said, some people might not like that. My commentary friend of Steve Frazier didn't like the goddamn film very much at all. I think his comment was he thought it was awful. That's his opinion. You didn't like it that much, that's fine. It didn't hit his style, his flavor, his tastes, and certainly other critics and some of our fans probably didn't get to it as well, but I saw a lot of reviews from a lot of different people like they really liked the film, and I kind of like it too. Even though, like I said, it's not as scary, but it does have interesting set pieces, I think, that do work to a certain degree. They flow in and out of the story very well. And just like Ed and Lorraine, portrayed by Wilson and Farmiga, I can just watch them in anything. They're so good at doing these characters, and they're so heartfelt and so genuine, and have such a great rapport overall. Just like, I can just watch them in a story because they're so good doing these characters and doing such a great job to endear themselves to the audience and still have that loving quality. You end a lot of these films, even though you get a lot, they turn the tone a lot darker when they're doing the replays of the different things in the end credits. They end the main story on like these positive notes, these very interesting ways of ending a horror film that's not typical. You're invested in these characters, and that is so much of what brings this franchise along so well. They bring you through. If you're not as invested in certain parts of the story or certain things aren't working, I think you're probably still involved with the characters. I think you're still involved with what those two are doing on screen so much because they're so damn good at it. And again, the other actors in the film are really phenomenal type of stuff. They're really exceptionally talented people bringing in very good characters who are just like really just aiding the story so much. I just like it. I like it. I don't love it. I don't think it's great. But I still think it's a good addition to this whole thing. And though apparently some of the spin-offs are not too good, a couple of them are okay. But just like this mainline Conjuring stuff is a really good crowd-pleasing horror franchise. And I think they've maintained it on a very good, calculated level where they're not trying to churn it out every year and a half, 2 years or whatnot. They're taking their time, choosing the right stories, going off in the right directions for the most part, getting some very, very talented people who want to work with this type of story and these types of characters and these scenarios and dealing with that type of stuff. It's like, it's a really good franchise on these 3 films. And if they want to do more spin-offs here and there, but I liked so much like they weren't trying to set up anything for a spin-off in this whole thing. You weren't trying to do the Crooked Man or the Nun or anything like that, which felt again a little shoehorned into the last film to a certain degree. This comes out very well. It's nice, self-contained. They're not trying to be overdone with it in that regard. They're trying to just tell a self-contained story that works from start to finish, flows organically, has very good characters, well-written stuff. I think it comes off very nicely. So, I don't know what else to really say about it. It's like, again, could be better in some places. Like, again, the Arnie storyline is kind of just doesn't have a lot of meat to it. It's just kind of like there to set up the other stuff that we're getting much more deeper into as the story goes on. But speaking of all that type of stuff, there is a actual tie-in comic from DC that was kind of a prequel to this type of thing, kind of setting up the story of Jessica, the girl that they go off in the woods and trying to find that stuff and had the visions of. They actually had a set-up story for that, and I think it was a 5-issue DC comic series that launched the DC Horror imprint and is being released on March 8th of 2022 in a hardcover edition. So, interested to check that out, but I'm producing this about 2 weeks ahead of when that's actually going to be released. So, unfortunately, can't really comment on it at this point in time, but they had a real nice preview of it on the actual Blu-ray. It seemed like, man, I actually miss reading comics. This was very intriguing to me. So I'll probably be picking that hardcover up and checking it out and see if I can. It adds a little something extra, and plus they had like back stories at the back end of the comic. I don't remember the actual technical industry name for it, but they actually had additional stories at the end of it. It's like, okay, this is a story about another artifact inside the Warrens' room or whatnot, their little archive or whatnot. It's very interesting. I don't know if they're going to continue it any way, shape, or form, but it's like, it's kind of a nice thing for DC to kind of tie that in there and stuff like that and kind of get that going. It's like, that's a nice way to kind of cross-brand it and kind of do some interesting things. Kind of add a little something extra on top of the story there that you don't really need as an essential thing, but anyone who's interested in it, you add a little something, a little more substance, a little bit more on top of the entire thing of The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. So it's called The Conjuring the Lover. So guys, I'd like to hear what you thought about this third film in the main Conjuring franchise. And so really got at this point in time. So it's kind of, it's like, I heard mixed things, whatnot going into it. Then I rented it, watched it. It's like, this was actually kind of okay and stuff like that. So it's like, I've had this kind of sitting, waiting to kind of do this since this previous October. So glad I finally got around to it, kind of expel these thoughts to you guys. It's like, it's good. I think it's good. I think it's a good, solid piece of work on Michael Chaves. I think he, even though like Curse of La Llorona was kind of like, that one didn't turn out quite as critically well and endearing or whatnot. This one, I think, probably won a lot of other people over and like, okay, this guy could probably do some good stuff. He can hone and refine some qualities, get away from the jump scares and kind of focus in on different things. He could probably do some really interesting stuff moving forward. So we'll see where that goes and all that type of stuff and see if they're continue on with the franchise. So guys, thanks much. There's always the Patreon to contribute something every month. You get early access to various things and just help support the channel in general. So guys, thanks so much. Take care.